So now we come to session 2. Once again, another, I think, stellar lineup. Delighted that the chair of ITV, Sir Peter Bazalgette, is joining us. And he is in conversation with another of the most experienced commentators, respected media commentators and journalists that we have. Once again, a long-term friend of the VLV. That is Torrin Douglas. So Torrin, thank you for joining us. Thank you for doing this. And I hand over to you to start this session. Go. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Colin, and hello everybody. And I'm sorry we can't all meet in. I'm going to be interviewing Sir Peter for about 20 minutes or so. Then I'm going to ask some of your questions, so please do submit them via the chat function. Sir Peter, Baz, as he likes to be known to one and all, needs no introduction, but I think it's always useful to remind people of our speaker's experience and previous roles. He's been chairman of ITV since May 2016. He's a former president of the Royal Television Society. He began his 40-year career in media as a BBC News trainee before founding his own production company and creating such TV hits as Ready Steady Cook, Changing Rooms and Ground Force. As chairman of Endemol, he helped turn shows like Big Brother and Deal or No Deal into worldwide successes. He was chairman of Arts Council England from 2013 to 2017, a non-executive director at the DCMS, and 3 years ago, he led an independent review into the UK's creative industries as part of the government's industrial strategy. Good morning, Baz. I'd like to ask you a bit about the creative industries and how they're faring, and also about ITV. But I'd like to begin with a speech you gave last week about public service broadcasting, the Charles Wheeler Lecture. You defined the key elements of PSB, and you also said that till now, the debate about PSB has not been good enough. So what did you mean? Tell us a bit more about what we should be debating.
Yes, well, thanks, Torrin. Good to see you, and good morning, everyone. What I was arguing in that speech last week, Torrin, was that sometimes when I listen to PSB, public service broadcasting, being debated, it sounds as though we're sort of discussing preserving some cherished stately home or some other piece of heritage. And we need to modernize the debate on public service broadcasting. I think we all know the reasons for public service broadcasting, and indeed Ray and Maria have just been talking about it, but the democratic part of it, which is to do with news and trusted and reliable information, the cultural bit of it, the national conversation, shared values, and the economic bit, the contribution to the screen industries that make the contribution they make to the creative industries. So that much we know, that's like the foundation. But I was arguing that one, public service broadcasting, why would you define it by its means of distribution, broadcasting, when it's all about content? You wouldn't, and you shouldn't. And indeed, broadcasting itself is a somewhat otiose term, because a lot of our viewing now is one-to-one on a streaming service, not as it were part of a mass audience. So I suggested the phrase critical social content. Torrin, you may have a better phrase for it, as a new way of doing it. And then I said, look, I'll be very brief and I won't go into them, but I said, look, for me today, public service broadcasting is a modern concept to address the challenges of the 21st century. And I said there were 5. The trusted and reliable news we need in the era of internet anarchy, which has been well demonstrated by the American election. Secondly, content that promotes and develops our shared values, something that PSB has always done, but in a very divided world and the internet world, our shared values are actually more important than ever before. National resilience, which we've known all about during this year of COVID, not just in terms of getting key public service messages over, but properly scrutinising the government's performance. The furthering of the creative industries, which I mentioned just now, which are one of the growth industries for Britain's future. And finally, nurturing our soft power abroad. You know, we've trebled our programme exports. The latest numbers for programme exports actually came out from PACT yesterday, pretty well 1.5 billion. That's more than 3 times what it was at the time of the Communications Act in 2003, 17 years ago. And I pointed out in the speech that on its own, BBC World Service, which I do listen to sometimes, I think is extraordinarily good and amazing at putting over British values and British culture around the world, not in an imperialistic sense, but as something we can share with other people. So I hope that wasn't too long an answer, but that's what I was arguing last week in a nutshell.
And the most important element of PSB, you said, is the trusted and reliable news. And of course, it's not been a good time for trusted and reliable news, has it? So how worrying is all that, both in America and here, and what should be done about it?
So I said that what's been going on in America, and I don't know about you, Torin, but I follow American politics pretty closely. So I've been watching CNN. I've been reading the New York Times and the Washington Post. I've been looking at some of the stuff online. And I am frankly incredibly alarmed, right from the stuff that's been on Fox News, where they've succeeded in making a whole part of the population angry. They've perpetrated, frankly, racist tropes. And with their shock jocks in the evening, they've had a thoroughly extraordinary effect on the populace of America. But beyond what's on television, and I noticed also that CNN has become equally polemical against Trump. So it thinks nothing of just, rather than reporting, but just slagging him off, even in their election night program. And then beyond that, the real issue is what's on the internet. So as the conventional media has tried to report the fact there was no election fraud, many of the viewers of Fox News have departed Fox News and gone on to internet services like Parler and Rumble. Millions of new people going there, where for them, there seems to be an alternative universe in which Trump is president for life. Now, these are profoundly disturbing developments to democracy. So I said, I do not know precisely how we regulate the internet, but every liberal democracy is currently struggling with the challenge of regulating the internet, and news is only one part of it. But at the same time as that, what I was clear about was that public service broadcasting, critical social content, news that has been made by ethical, trained journalists, properly resourced, is dispassionately reported. It may not always be perfect, but does its best to be live up to those tenets. I was arguing that you need that there as a gold standard, and I was arguing actually that it's more important now than it was in the age of Lord Reith. And so sustaining a system in which you have ITV News, BBC News, Channel 4 News, and so on, is really, really important. And I also think newspapers are important, and their model is more economically challenged than television.
As you say, partly it's a question of how it can be funded. And as you say, the business model for local newspapers is well and truly broken. And also for investigative journalism, both in print and broadcast, it's not nearly as healthy as it was. So how should we fund that trusted and reliable news? I mean, can we rely on the system as it is at the moment, or have we got to come up with new mechanisms?
So you're quite right to point out that most television news in this country, at any rate, and in most countries, the United States is, with CNN and Fox, is a bit of an exception, but news has to be subsidized. So ITV News has to be subsidized by the revenue we get from commercials around our entertainment programs, and we're happy to do that. BBC News is subsidized by the license fee. So what I would argue is that we need to find means of continuing the revenue stream that subsidizes this news that I've just argued is so important. So what does that mean? It means that we need to find a way beyond the next charter renewal of the BBC in 7 years' time of funding the BBC. I'm not going to debate with you today what that method of funding should be, but I suggested in the speech I gave last week that hypothecated funding is the answer rather than voluntary funding, because what that is forget the BBC for a moment, that is a nation and a people saying, this is something we need in our democracy for an informed citizenry, and this is how we are going to fund it. So that's number one, that's part one. Long-term funding of the BBC in the correct way. It may not be the license fee, it may be a household tax, it may be from taxation. Then the second part of that is the news that you find on Channel 4, ITV, Channel 5, which we were just hearing about from Maria. And there, the key to this is that the public service licenses that Ofcom oversees mean something, that every contract has to have consideration. That is something you do to make sure there is a flow of value. That's how a contract works. And what we need to see now, and you'll have seen an op-ed from the leaders of the public service broadcasters on this last week, what we need to see now is an update of the principle of the 2003 Communications Act. That principle was that we deem public service broadcasting to be a public good. And since it is an important public good, we need people to be able to find it. So the 2003 Act said it should be prominent on platforms such as Sky and Virgin and so on. Now, update that 17 years, and you're talking of the new supranational monopolies that dominate the internet and are the platforms we will go to for our internet, for our entertainment in the future. These are the people who will essentially be the ringmasters of our content, and they're already emerging. There's Sky, Comcast, there's Amazon, there's Apple. These people seek to be platforms where you go for all your different content. So those are the platforms that we need to give three things for public service content. And this applies across to all the public service broadcasters. It's very simple, and it's really not strange. It's not a strange idea. It's an update of the 203 Act. We need access. In other words, they should have to carry the content. Secondly, it should be prominent. And that has a whole new meaning compared to 17 years ago. And thirdly, the public service broadcasters, who are after all bringing enormous value to those platforms with all the viewers, should get fair value for it. Very simple principles, shouldn't be difficult to execute, and actually, frankly, are somewhat in the interest of those platforms, because that public service content is to their benefit as well.
You say it's simple, and I have to be as skeptical as Ray was with Maria on this. How can it be done? If they don't want to do it, what sanctions do we as Britain have? We may have an Ofcom recommendation. We know that the government is finding it time to fit it into its legislative schedule. But even if it does, what can we do to actually make them do it? I just do not understand how that is possible.
Well, Torin, it's an old idea. It's called passing a law. And laws are to be obeyed. Now, I know you're being skeptical. You're saying how easy, you're really asking the question. It's broader than broadcasting, and you're quite right to ask it. How easy is it to regulate the internet? And this is a dilemma for all, as I said earlier, liberal democracies. And it goes way beyond broadcasting. It's to do with antisocial content. It's to do with abuse of personal data. It's to do with companies that don't always pay the tax in the places they operate in. There are all sorts of issues around these supranational monopolies, and we're all struggling with how to get to grips with it. But I have to tell you, we will. And one of the ways we'll do it is we will knock off one or two issues one by one. And a fairly easy one to knock off is to say to people, if you wish to have a platform in our territory, and we welcome you, by the way, and we welcome your content and your service to consumers. Excellent, we love to have you here. If you wish to do that and operate as a business in this country, we want you to give prominence to this content that is a public good. And here is a law that says you should do so. And as I say, we passed a law like it before. Why shouldn't we be able to do so again, Torin?
Would it be easier to make that hold if we were still part of the EU and the audiovisual agreements that they have? That would be a bigger fish for these other organisations to fry.
You're not wanting a 10-minute debate about Brexit now, are you, Torin? Tell me you're not.
I'm not. But
we do have to move on. But no, it's a fair question, actually, because there are, as you quite rightly point out, some quite important issues about leaving the EU to do with content of European origin and other matters. And it is true that the EU is a supranational group of countries that is attempting to regulate the internet, although I'd argue it's only scratching the surface in matters of taxation, in matters of privacy, taxation with Apple, privacy with Facebook, and market manipulation with Google of search. So they have tried, but they've only scratched the surface. There is a counter argument to your point. I'm not taking a position on Brexit here, by the way. I'd like to make that quite clear. But there is a counter argument to your point, Torin, and that is that as a single country, you arguably have more freedom to act in this matter.
Okay, yeah. Can I go back to the funding of PSB generally? I know you said you didn't really want to get into it, but I'd like to push you on it, because this is going to be such a fundamental debate going on. Should we be trying to keep the license fee and make it work? Obviously that allows universality. I mean, what are the things that you would favour at the moment, even if you haven't come down on any one or the other?
Well, so look, it's a really important question. The BBC is an asset of extraordinary value to this country, both domestically and internationally. But we are living through an industrial revolution, the digital revolution, the internet age. It's more disruptive than any industrial revolution we've ever known before. So every institution has to respond to this. No institution is immune from reform. So it's quite right for everybody to question the funding mechanism of the BBC, and we have 7 years to sort it out. I did refer to it last week as a bit like painting the Forth Road Bridge, you know, it sort of comes round, and when you finish the conversation, you find you're starting it again. Look, so I'll just repeat the point I made. I believe the BBC should have hypothecated funding, not voluntary funding. But I have a completely open mind as to whether it comes out straight out of the taxation pot. There are dangers there because that gives the Treasury quite a lot of control over upping and downing how much money the BBC gets. Whether it's some sort of household tax, household media tax that is deemed to be in the public interest, or whether you continue with the license fee despite its, you know, some of its contradictions. I have a completely open mind, but I do think the BBC should get hypothecated funding, and I'm not sorry we're discussing it now, because as I say, for me, it's not actually about the BBC. It's about whether a country has got the will to invest in something really important called critical social content, which, as I say, is important for its democracy, its culture, and its economy.
Should the BBC be smaller? Every Director General and Chairman I've known and reported on said it was going to be smaller at the end of their term, and it never was. It was larger. How small would be too small for it to play a meaningful role? Should it be looking to shrink?
I think we should cut the new Director General a little slack here, Torin. I'm sure Tim is a very, very experienced manager and a good businessman, as well as a good media man, as it were, broadcaster. And he will be looking at the BBC and seeing how he can make it fit for purpose in the internet age. I've no idea whether that makes it smaller, the same size, or bigger. I haven't a view on that, but I think we should give Tim the space to do the work he needs to do.
John Whittingdale still seems to want to see the BBC operating under a market failure model, i.e. providing no content that the market can provide. Would that worry you, and if so, why? Well,
there is a truth in what John says, and that is that the good that we call public service broadcasting, the public good, is in one sense a market failure. It's something you want to make sure that is provided that you don't think will be provided otherwise, and independent, impartial news. I'm not saying nobody else does it, but a gold standard of that invested in is in a sense something that the market doesn't wholly provide. So that there's a logic to what John says. Where I might part company with John, and he and I have discussed this many times, is it's not simply market failure. Because if you want the BBC to thrive, it has to attract a reasonable amount of audience to justify hypothecated funding. And that doesn't mean merely providing news services. And it doesn't mean merely providing special interest documentaries or anything else that you might think the market might not provide. It means being able to provide entertainment programs that give it a legitimacy and a popular reach. And those entertainment programs that give it a legitimacy and a popular reach also draw more people to its news programs, which are one of the most important part of its public good. So I don't think it's simply a question of market failure, but I do accept that part of it is market failure.
We're getting some questions in from the audience on the prominence issue and PSBs. And one is, in terms of prominence, should it be only the PSB elements of ITV's output that get prominence? So should I'm a Celebrity get prominence? As I say, I still haven't got my head around quite how the prominence thing would work, but what's your view on that?
Well, that is something that would not work. Because if you want to say you're going to give prominence to one programme and not another in a schedule, or indeed in a choice of programs on a direct-to-consumer service like All4 or ITV Hub or iPlayer. That's just too complicated. So no, it has to be the whole service.
That's what I would have assumed. I couldn't see how it could. So you have to look at ITV as a whole and say we are a public good, our news and all our other things.
Yes,
but there's
Torin, I'd have to say you'd have some difficulty in proving to me that quite a lot of our entertainment programs don't have a public service element. I mean, I've always been very clear that, for instance, our soap operas, Coronation Street and Emmerdale, two of the most popular programs this country has, have a massive public service element. It's one of the ways we define who we are as a country. We explore all sorts of social issues in them. So, you know, you would get down to a very complex conversation if you tried to distinguish between programs.
Yeah, there's a question that touches on this, in fact, from Bob Dolson, ex-BBC. And he says, as Sir Peter said, the current focus and ambition of PSBs appears to be on demand and streaming services, i.e. that's where they're now putting their focus. But don't PSBs have a responsibility to society to offer and encourage shared experiences? So again, a bit of what you're saying there, I think.
Yeah, well, look, I think that's a very good point. But the last time I looked, the BBC and ITV still had a schedule. And the numbers, even post-COVID, are that about 60% of people still watch their television live, and they should be able to do so. The schedule's here for a long time to come. But I think the questioner would, it was Bob, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
I think Bob would himself accept that one of the ways we all like to watch television now is to order a program on demand. So you have to have both. And I might point out that a shared experience of 3 million people watching a program over a 48-hour period, but at slightly different times, is still a shared experience. So I think on-demand services are part of the shared experience.
Thank you. Still on prominence, Carol Tongue has asked this, or she points out, first of all, if the UK signs a deal with the US, it could imitate an agreement signed by the US and Canada, which could preclude us from regulating the internet, as Peter describes. Are we going to make sure such a clause is not in a future UK-US trade deal? So that's Carol, who obviously has great experience of Europe.
Carol does have vast experience of these matters, and she's right to be concerned that any future trade deal with the US does not give away some of the important things that we wish to do with our broadcasting. And that includes having a publicly funded broadcaster like the BBC. So it's a danger. It's one I happen to know the Department of International Trade is well aware of, because I've taken it up with both politicians and civil servants there myself personally, and I'm sure Carol has too. And I think the change of president that we learned in the last 24 hours is now official in America at last. I think the change of president may have a bearing on that. And I expect there might be a little bit of argy-bargy with, as it were, pressure from some of the supranational monopolies I referred to earlier, or some of the Hollywood companies on this. But let's bear in mind that the Congress in America is itself now looking at how it should regulate the internet, and that's coming from both the Republicans and the Democrats. So all is not lost in this matter, but we need to be vigilant.
Bringing it back to the UK for the moment, and the relationship between this government and public service broadcasting generally, and I'll pick up on what was sort of discussed earlier. Do you believe, as Maria does, that this government actually gets public service broadcasting? And tied to that, are you happy with the makeup of the advisory panel they've set up to provide independent expertise and advice?
Yeah, well, taking the first part first, I'm absolutely certain that the government, the opposition, and the members of parliament understand public service broadcasting and see its value. My concern is a different one. It's one of focus. There are certain things we need done, and which is why there's a DCMS review of PSB and an Ofcom review of PSB and so on. And finding time in the schedule of government for the legislation you need, and in a year of COVID and Brexit, getting focus on it, that's the challenge. And that's why we need to continue to talk to the government, about these issues that matter. We need to publicise them, we need to write about them, those of us who care about them, because what we need, a government which has many legitimate distractions, let's face it, in a very difficult year, we need focus on it. The second point you asked was about the panel, and I'm smiling because I noticed there are representatives of, or people with experience of, for instance, Virgin and Facebook on the panel, and I would just say to the Secretary of State that BBC and ITV will be only too happy to serve on the panel if invited.
I think they will reply that Lord Grade is fulfilling that role for ITV, BBC, Channel 4 and everybody else.
The blessed Lord Grade, whom God must preserve.
Indeed. I did say I would talk to you about ITV and the creative industries, and we may well get back to public service broadcasting. But it's obviously been a difficult time for all broadcasters. How is ITV faring in this COVID world? I see Carolyn McCall said you're hoping for a slight advertising recovery in the last 3 months, but obviously it's not been easy.
No, look, it's been an incredibly tough year for commercial broadcasters, as it has been for other people, outside advertisers, newspapers and so on. Very tough year indeed. ITV has proved itself to be an extremely resilient company. We have had a greater reduction in advertising in the months of April and May than we'd ever had in a single month in the history of ITV. And I'm not saying now what I think about ITV's results, which we'll reveal in February for this year, but the consensus amongst analysts in the city is that ITV's advertising will fall by between 10 and 15% this year. And to give you a comparative measure, the largest annual fall in ITV advertising ever before was indeed under the blessed Lord Grade, who had to deal with the credit crunch in 2009, when it went down 9%. So if it goes down by as much as the analysts are saying, that will be larger than we've ever experienced before. But despite that, we are resilient. We have got 85% of our productions back up and running, having had, a very barren period during the summer. And advertising, as we guided in our recent market update, we're forecasting it to be slightly up year on year in the last quarter. Now that shows that there's a good deal of resilience. So a tough year, but how is ITV doing? We're pretty resilient. And by the way, I should add, Torin, part of that resilience is the modernisation that Carolyn McCall is carrying out and has said much about, but it involves continuing to develop our production company. It involves what she calls more than TV. It involves having a new advertising platform, Planet V, where advertisers and brands can buy programmatically targeted impacts on our ITV Hub service. And it involves many more direct-to-consumer services such as BritBox and ITV Hub Plus.
Thank you. We saw a great presentation from Maria about Channel 5. Are you worried that they may be stealing your PSB clothes?
Well, the one thing we can't compete with Channel 5 in is programmes about Yorkshire farms and Yorkshire vets. I think they have brilliantly monopolised that, and I think we're going to retire from that. Although I'm not saying Yorkshire, which my wife is a Yorkshire woman, so I must be very careful to choose my words carefully here. I'm not saying Yorkshire will never be featured on ITV. Oh, no, no, no. But I think we'll congratulate Channel 5 on being the Yorkshire television channel, and we'll leave it at that, Torin.
All right. Okay. If anyone else has any more questions, they can put them through on the chat facility. I said I'd talk about creative industries. They, of course, have been hit particularly hard in the COVID crisis. What is the future and what is the potential there? How badly have they been damaged, and are they perhaps the way out for Britain? Yes.
Well, you rightly said, Torin, that I had written a report on the creative industries for the government, which formed part of their industrial strategy, which I wrote 3 years ago. The potential then for the creative industries I defined as creating at least 1 million new jobs in the next decade. Creative industries was at the time growing at 3 times the rate of the economy. Sometimes it's been growing even faster than that. And the latest number we have is that it was worth 112 billion to the British economy, about 5–6% of the economy in 2018. Unfortunately, the next number we're going to get will be 2019, which will show further growth. we're not going to get the 2020 number for at least a year. So we won't know precisely what the damage to the creative industries are. But let me put it this way. In an era when AI is going to destroy jobs in many sectors, the creative industries, which we're very good at and have a worldwide reputation for, will recover, they will grow, and we are going to, as a country, this, what you might call the knowledge economy, is going to be critical to us. We may not be a heavy manufacturing economy anymore, but we're going to be a strong IP economy. So I would argue the creative industries are absolutely strategically core to Britain's future.
Thank you.
And by the way, the screen industry is an important part of that.
I understand that. We've had another question. This is from Sarah Thane, a VLV member, ex-ITV, ITC, and so on. One of the most threatened areas of news coverage is foreign news on all the PSB channels. It seems that there are only one or two running international stories that can be properly resourced at any one time. Although competition in news provision is generally a good thing, pooling arrangements exist for coverage of, for example, royal stories. Is there scope for more shared foreign coverage? Otherwise, the risk of insularity will grow. So shared foreign coverage, do you think that's a goer?
Well, look, it's certainly worth exploring. I would dispute that foreign coverage is damaged. If you look at an average news broadcast, a bulletin. Oh, hang on one moment. Somebody started the Hoover, Torrin. Hang on. Can you? I'm just on the phone. Sorry about that. Normal life has to go on, but I didn't think you wanted to hear too much of my domestic arrangements. So I thought I'd better take direct action. I think the question was about foreign coverage, very important question. Yeah. I think if you look at an average bulletin, I watched ITV News at 10 o'clock last night. There were 3 or 4 foreign stories from correspondents around the world. We do, in a sense, pool foreign coverage in a different way, in that the news organisations quite frequently use the footage from other international organisations. And if you listen to BBC World Service, as I do, you'll often find journalists from American stations interviewed and willing to be interviewed to give their insights. So actually, I think it's in a better situation than the questioner implies.
I mean, I might disagree with that. I think we've all heard of those sort of documentaries that we used to have, Disappearing World and things like that. The record shows that there is an awful lot less of that, partly because there may not be an audience appetite for it. And we're all now having to look far more at what the audience wants rather than what is good for them. Is that a definition of PSB that you might bring in?
I think that sounds rather dirigiste to me, Torrin, which is out of character for you. No, look, I think the question was about news, not about documentaries. I think your point about documentaries is fair, but I think news was a little unfair.
Right, understand. Right, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to add just a few questions. One is impartiality. We're looking at a new news channel, GBTV, which will be coming from a right point of view. You mentioned Fox and so on. How crucial is impartiality as a fundamental principle, and how difficult is it? And is it obviously getting more difficult?
Well, it's always been difficult in the sense, you know, you can get into a philosophical argument about whether who is one person's impartiality, another person's partiality. But it is an admirable thing to aim for. It is something that Ofcom has found it quite easy, actually, to legislate on. Witness its action against Russia Today and Iranian TV in the last 3 or 4 years. And so I think it is a gold standard. You talk about the new news channels. We should welcome them if they can. They'll have to, if they want to be television channels, they have to abide by Ofcom's rules. The only thing I would counsel you to be cautious about is that GB News, which sounds a very interesting service with some very good people involved, has not yet raised all the capital it needs to put its service out. So it's not yet operational. And as we discussed earlier, most of the news services that we have seen in this country, or that we currently see, all of the television news services are subsidized. So they have a big task. I hope they succeed in it, but they have a big challenge to make a profitable news channel in this country. It's easier in America because it's a much bigger media market.
And finally, for PSB, isn't the big problem really that young people just aren't watching those channels, those PSB channels? They're not used to it. They haven't grown up with it in the same way. The problem is young people. Is that a threat to PSB?
You must be referring to the 75% share of 16 to 35-year-olds that I'm a Celebrity had in its Welsh castle on its opening night, Torrin. So, I mean, no is the answer. Look, we're all changing our viewing habits, and it's up to us to make sure we make programs that appeal to everybody. And that's why we have our services like ITV Hub and BBC iPlayer. And in the future, they're going to be commissioning their own programs that appeal to absolutely to that age group, so that it isn't just Netflix and Amazon that appeal to them. We can appeal to them too, and we can commission the programs they like. We can do it.
Thank you. Peter, Baz, thank you very, very much. And now back to Colin Brown. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to Torrin and Baz for another really interesting. We've covered a wide range of activities so far in our sessions this morning, but we've been concentrating, I guess, particularly on the big picture of national, international broadcasting and television. Really important to the VLV and our members is the quality and range of broadcasting more locally, both in the UK, in the nations of the UK, in its regions, and in local areas. And that's what we're going to be concentrating on in this next panel session.